Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Encourage Mindset. My name is Ethan Vandehei, and alongside me today, I have John Preston. We are excited to have him onto the show, proudly presented by Infinity Exteriors. And John is going to talk a little bit about who he is, but I got to know a little bit from his amazing bio that he put on LinkedIn and our quick conversations we've had. And it sounds like John has grew up on a farm in Kentucky. So, John, how did growing up on a farm in Kentucky shape your mindset about hard work, perseverance, anything else that maybe you've kind of picked up characteristic wise that you want to share?
Well, I think growing up on a farm, you really learn to be self-reliant. I mean, because on a farming's generally 7 days a week. You usually try not to often work, maybe on Sunday. But the reality of it is, if something breaks, you can't wait for it to be fixed. You got to figure out how to fix it yourself. Or when there's a problem, you can't always rely on bringing in experts to analyze it and having committees figure out what to do. You have to react quickly, and you have to basically be able to fix things and do things yourself, or you're going to basically just shut down. And so I think that is a lesson that applies throughout all of life is if you wait for someone else to fix your problems, you're going to be stalled. And the longer you're stalled, the more that gets in your head and the less likely you are to move forward. And I think, avoiding that spiral from the very beginning and recognizing when you need to take action now is really the key to a lot of success. And it's what holds a lot of people back, because if you don't notice that moment when you start to get in your head and when you start to hit those barriers and take action immediately, you're going to be down and out for a while. And I think that lesson stems from growing up on a farm and having to learn to fix your problems when they happened instead of wait for somebody else.
How long were you on the farm out of curiosity?
Well, I grew up. My granddad had a farm, and so my home was built on kind of a corner of it. So I was just, all my teenage years was farming, and then, as I went through college, I still went back in the summers and did a lot of farming. And I guess you don't really ever get that out of your system. I mean, even today, even though I know it would physically kill me to get back out and do some of those farm work, I do still miss it occasionally. And I think that just becomes a part of who you are.
Yeah, I like that you brought up a lot of the characteristics about kind of what entrepreneurship is in a way, because farming kind of is that in a sense. So, talk to me a little bit about the way that you've kind of who you are today. It sounds like you're a coach. It sounds like you help entrepreneurs. So, what's been kind of the most common mental roadblock you've seen, and how do you help people overcome it?
Well, it's interesting. I actually come from a physics background. That's what I studied in school. And I generally used to think all of the self-help tools you see are just kind of total crap. It just didn't make sense to me that you could say a few nice things in the mirror and suddenly everything realigns itself for you to be successful. As I started working with people directly and coaching them and recognizing the barriers that was keeping them from succeeding, what I realized is as a science-minded person, I was missing a very key component. And that is the fact that every single person lives their life right on the edge of being paralyzed by fear and insecurity and doubt. And as a result, we're incredibly inefficient in what we do. And we spend more time worrying about what we've done or what's going to happen, stressing over our current situation, trying to determine what we should do next because we're overwhelmed with all of the options. And the result is we lock up. And so we're right on that edge of being paralyzed. And if you fall off the wrong side, then you're labeled as lazy. You beat yourself up over not being able to advance. You just really, it spirals out of control if you fall on the wrong side of that razor's edge. So the challenge is finding the tools which keep you on the positive side of that. Now, once you start to recognize those struggles in yourself and recognize that they're a basic component of humanity, it doesn't make you broken. So many people start to feel that doubt, insecurity, and fear, and they get paralyzed and they don't know what to do and they feel broken. And so they start beating themselves up more over it, which means they're even going to be more paralyzed by the fear. So a lot of those tools, affirmations, visualization, meditation, those are great tools for pulling you away from that edge. Because the further you get away from that edge, the more you're able to take action. Because what most people running a business or trying any endeavor don't realize is that worrying about work is not work. Stressing about work is not work. Trying to decide what to do is not doing something. And one of the great experiments that I do with all my clients and do it with a lot of people is I have them hand their phone to a spouse or a kid or somebody else and have that spouse or the kid set 10 random alarms over the next week during working hours. And so the person doesn't know when these alarms are going off. And I give them a little diary or just have them write down what you're doing when that alarm goes off. And it's amazing. I've done this with probably 300 people. And nobody has ever been caught working more than 4 times out of the 10. And yet, if you'd ask them beforehand, they would have sworn that they're putting in all the hours they possibly can, that they can't take anymore, that they're worked to death. And then we find out that they're repeatedly caught thinking about work instead of actually working. And one of the things that is so important is once you recognize those battles and you take control of it, you automatically find yourself working more and thinking about work less. And that's really what moves you into success and gives you such a huge competitive advantage. Now, the flip side of that, which is really cool, is when you not only start to recognize those trends within yourself, but you start to recognize those within other people that you are interacting with as well, whether it be customers, whether it be employees, whether it be family. Once you start to recognize that they're also dealing with those fears and insecurities, you can really start to understand their decisions. And you can also begin to help them deal with those fears. And that's a very powerful thing, especially in sales. Because most of the time, if you've got a really good product that everybody universally recognizes is a win-win for everybody, the reason the customer doesn't buy is their own insecurities, their imposter syndrome, their fear of making bad decisions. And if you're able to help them feel more comfortable with their ability to make decisions, you're going to have a lot more luck building your business.
I never have heard of some of those points, and I loved that. I think the random alarm situation is something a lot of people and myself probably need because I agree. I mean, yeah, I have a 9 to 5. If somebody were to randomly put the alarms off and let's say the 10 alarms go off during the 9 to 5 span, I'm sure there's going to be some times where I'm caught lacking. But for the most part, I hope I'm being a good employee and doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing. But
it's different. It's interesting. One of the things you mentioned earlier about my transition from working in the corporate world to going out on my own and starting my own business. And when you're preparing to do that, most of the time people think about, well, you're your own boss. Well, you forget you're also your own employee. And the reality of it is most of the time we suck as our own employee. And what you don't realize is we all have this inner voice that is just an absolute jackass. It's always telling us we suck. It's telling us we can't do this. It's telling us, who do you think you are kind of thing. And when we're working for someone else, that voice is kind of kept in check because we've got responsibilities to somebody else. We are much, much better at holding ourselves accountable for other people than we are for holding ourselves accountable for ourselves. And so the moment you don't have that other person holding you accountable, if you have a job, you may have a lot of autonomy, but the reality is they're going to notice if you don't show up for work. And they're going to notice if you decide to sleep in one day. And once you're out from under that protection and that voice gets really, really loud in your head, that's when you struggle. Because, when alarm goes off at 6:30 in the morning and you've got to be at the office at 8, there's no inner struggle. I've got to get out. I've got to take my shower. I've got to start my morning routine. I've got to get in. I've got to drive to the office so that my butt's in that chair at 8:01. You don't have that battle. But the first day that alarm goes off, when you're working for yourself, this inner conversation starts up. Well, I could sleep another 10 minutes. Nobody's going to notice. It really doesn't matter if I start at 8 o'clock or start at 8:15 and blah, blah, blah. And that argument starts to take place on every decision you make. And that voice is fighting with you because you no longer have that check and balance that came with having a boss. And most people aren't prepared for that. Your success or failure in all of life, but especially if you're trying to build something on your own, comes back to a series of decisions you make throughout the day. And it's always the same choice. What I know I should do versus what I feel like doing. We make hundreds of those decisions all day long. I know I should eat the apple, but I really want the cake. I know I should go to the gym, but I really just want to sit here on the couch and watch TV. I know I should pick up the phone and make prospecting calls, but I just don't feel like it. And most of the time, everybody picks wrong. And the difference between a very successful person and everybody else is they pick right a few more times a day. I mean, if you go back and look, like when Bill Gates is building Microsoft, he still chose the cake most of the time. He chose right more times than everybody else did. And the accumulated effect of those small decisions is why he is where he is today. And we have to remember that day in and day out. And that's why having the tools in place that just make it easier for you to pick what you should do instead of what you feel like doing a few more times a day, and that leads to success.
John, I feel like that point can be emphasized across your personal life too. Like
Absolutely.
Even just
it's all aspects.
Yeah. For sure. Even marriage, for sure. It just doesn't have to be outside starting a business. I guess, that brings up a fun thing that you kind of went off and did. You created a book series called 40 Flushes.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about that. Where did that idea come from? How does, humor play a role in a positive mindset?
Well, one of the things that I discovered, I was in the publishing world for a while, and I coached publishers and trained sales teams and that kind of thing who sold advertising. And what I kept seeing over and over and over again were small business owners and mid-sized business owners who were incredibly good at what they did, but incredibly bad at running a business doing it. And the reality is this: it doesn't matter when you're running a business. It does not matter how good your product is or how good your services are. If you don't know how to run a business, you're not going to be successful. A bad plumber who knows how to run a business is going to have a much greater success than the world's greatest plumber who doesn't. And most people don't like to hear that because we like to think the best always wins. But in business, the ones who understand business the most always win. And so I kept seeing over and over and over again, I kept seeing businesses with great products, with great services that just failed. 22% of every small business in the country fails every year. And the vast majority of them don't fail because they don't have a good product. They fail because they don't know what they're doing. And what's worse is most of the people who know the least, who need the most help, are also people who either their pride or their lack of free time prevents them from educating themselves. And a lot of times, you talk about this voice inside your head. Well, one of the voices inside our head as we get older is, I can't learn anymore. That's too hard. And when they hear people talking about learning business, they see all these charts and they see these graphs and they hear these very, very dull business professors doing a podcast. And it's just, and quite frankly, they just shut down. And if they shut down, that just feeds all of that insecurity. So now they know they can't run a business. They don't know how to run a business, but they also know that they can't learn. And so I've tried to come up with what could I create that would open the door for those folks to learn. What can I do? How can I put basic business lessons in a form that won't be intimidating? That will be very simple. So I created the bathroom reader, which is 40 flushes to grow your business, which is very literally 40 very essential business lessons that every business owner should know but doesn't. And they're told in very simple anecdotes with cartoons and jokes and poems. So it makes learning those 40 flushes, if not fun, I hope it's fun, but at the very least, it's not intimidating. Because of those insecurities we have, sometimes we are afraid to learn because we're afraid if we try and we don't get it, that it's going to reinforce all of those insecurities we have about our own intelligence. So I'm hoping that through 40 flushes, I give them a tool that will help them learn basic lessons so that they learn that they can learn. And once they learn that they can learn, hopefully they'll take that knowledge and go further and learn even more about how to run a business and really have a much greater chance of achieving the business that they set out to build in the first place.
Yeah, I just want to reemphasize that point a little bit of the learning. The learning that you're telling people to do is to actually study and practice and put this to use, not upload it to ChatGPT and have ChatGPT break it down for you. And then you go based off what ChatGPT creates bullet points of. I think that's what's mind blowing these days and getting very annoying is everybody is just using AI and nobody's being authentic. Nobody's building credibility anymore. Nobody's building transparency or trust. It's just all a bunch of garbage. So I love that you created this series because this series should be so creative and authentic and original and help give these people the motivation to go out and do what they should do in the first place.
Yeah, you bring up such a great point. One of the things, I mean, I use AI a lot. I think anybody in today's world, you have to, because you got to use the tool available to you. But the problem I see is AI right now is a toddler. It's only 2.5 years old. And I see it actually mimicking what our toddlers and humans do. I mean, basically, you want to please everybody. You
Yeah.
also don't want to admit that you can't do something, so you make stuff up. You lie to avoid actually having to do work. And I see all of those trends in the current AIs. And so what alarms me is not so much that people are using AI. The fact is they're using AI without the critical thinking skills to actually evaluate what AI is giving them. I mean, one of the things when I use AI, I read through everything it created. I look for lies. I look for things it made up, and I always find them. And I think most people are just blindly trusting what they're getting instead of actually validating that information through critical thinking skills that they need to develop on their own.
Totally. Yeah, I love that you built upon that even further. And it just
Yeah.
takes a high emotional intelligence and just general intelligence, I feel like, to be able to use AI to a complex and powerful way.
Right.
Um,
It,
when
it's funny, Ethan, and this kind of circles back to what we were just talking about. When you are, I've always wondered. There's things that I've just always wondered about the world, and that just don't make sense to the I guess the way this that I've always been brought up, and it's things like when you do research and you poll the happiness level in countries with dictators is often higher than the happiness level in countries with democracy. And in terms of happiness, and what I've realized, and this is so reflected in society, and it's reflected in what you were just saying with AI, is what creates so much struggle in people's attempt to become successful and to grow is the being paralyzed by decision. They call it decision fatigue. We're bombarded with so many decisions to make that we're terrified of making the wrong choice, and it just exhausts us. And so what happens is we find it very refreshing and relieving when someone else or something else will make those decisions for us. And that's what often leads people to certain political aspects, or even turning to AI, because if I can turn over my responsibility for making decisions to an AI, it takes a lot of pressure off my life.
Yeah, no,
And so
I
rather
agree.
than learning to handle those decisions and navigate decisions and make decisions on your own, it's so much easier to let somebody else just do it, or let AI just do it. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's not going to create long-term results.
Yeah, I've hit decision fatigue several times. Obviously, I usually hit it pretty much every weekend when it comes to choosing a restaurant. So I asked
Mm-hmm.
ChatGPT to make the choice. Um, but yeah, that's a great um, you know, mention and call out by you. So for everybody that's listening, John, everybody that feels stuck or overwhelmed, or they're tired of this decision making, they have this fatigue, and they want to start feeling more motivated again, more self confident again, more, I guess, rejuvenated would be another big word for you there. What encouragement can you give them today, or what piece of advice can you give them about changing their habits and starting fresh?
Well, I can tell you, and if somebody had told me this was going to be my advice years ago, I would have absolutely called BS on it. But the reality of it is, everything you do in life and your ability to deal with the stresses of the day and also the challenges of growing into the life you want, it all starts with your morning routine. If you don't have a morning routine that actually puts your mind in a good place to be successful and happy, you're not going to make it up throughout the day. I mean, it's one of the things I do every morning. Right behind the camera here, I've got a zero gravity chair. And every morning when I walk in the door, the very first thing I do before I check my emails, before I check, my social media, the very first thing I do is I sit down in that chair. I do a 15-minute guided meditation that is success driven. Then I have 20 affirmations that I say out loud 5 times a piece. And then I have some relaxing music that I use to visualize how my day is going to go. And then I read one educational article. And that 30 minutes effort every morning puts my mind in the right place to make the right decisions throughout the day. And it's just it seems kind of cliche, But that's the real truth of it, because if you look at your life and you evaluate how much time am I devoting to things that elevate my energy and my confidence versus how much time I'm engaged with things that drain it, most people fall into the category where everything they do is sapping their energy, but they have nothing in place to recharge those batteries. And so you have to be aware of that, and you have to be cognizant of it, and you've got to know where your energy comes from. And what I found is by doing that 30 minutes every morning, my batteries hit the day fully charged. And it allows me to make better decisions throughout the day. And having visualized how I want my day to go, it also means that I'm no longer spending all that time trying to decide what I'm going to do. Those decisions are made in advance, so I spend that time doing things.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the thing that I found as my thing that starts to re-energize me or charge me is definitely doing a morning prayer. The Bible app's been superior for that. They do a verse of the day, they do morning prayer and evening prayer. So just doing those guided prayers has been very helpful. I'm also very blessed. I have a 30+ minute drive to work. So I try to take that 30 minutes and either, like you said, listen to an educational podcast versus an article because I'm driving. But listening to something that actually helps you grow is totally the right direction versus the same old songs from 2005 all the way to 2025. So, John, is there anything else on Encourage Mindset that you want to share today?
Well, I tell you, this kind of touches on just exactly what we were just talking about. Is we live in a world that tends to favor entertainment versus education. And so many of the things we do as entertainment are actually incredible energy sucks. And we don't realize it because we don't look at it objectively. When you get online and you scroll 30 minutes through social media, you are mentally and emotionally exhausted afterwards. On the other hand, if you spent that same 30 minutes listening to an educational, inspirational podcast, you're charged and you're pumped. And yet we default so easily to the entertainment side, and that usually fuels our insecurities, our fears, our doubt. And all of those things work against us and stop us from achieving the life we want. You have to make a conscious effort to offset those with positive forces or overpower them with positive forces where you're able to just do the work, to stay focused, to stay driven, to not allow the little setbacks beat you up, and just take life and take it by the horns and run with it. But you have to start with being intentional about things that build your energy.
Yeah, well said. Thanks so much for coming on to today for Encourage Mindset. This was a pleasure to have you, John, and I appreciate all the insight that you gave our listeners today.
Well, I tell you what, I appreciate you having me on, Ethan. I wish you the best of luck, and if you need anything else, just let me know.